On the surface, Frank Sinatra was everything America adored. The smooth voice of romance, the rebel in a sharp suit, the ultimate showman who could command a stage or a movie set with effortless charm. He was the man who sang My Way and made the world believe in it. But in Hollywood, where glitz and glamour masked hidden corruption, Sinatra was far more than a singer. He was a witness, an insider, and some whispered, a keeper of secrets that could shatter careers. Sinatra's ties stretched far beyond the stage. He dined with presidents, laughed with mobsters, and spent nights surrounded by the most powerful names in show business. Unlike the millions who only saw the stars on magazine covers, Sinatra saw them unmasked. Their tempers, their betrayals, their cruelty behind closed doors. And those who crossed him rarely escaped his memory. Rumors have long persisted that Sinatra kept what some called a hidden list, a mental dossier of Hollywood's brightest icons who were not merely flawed, but truly evil. Names the public once worshipped, but which Sinatra believed hid monstrous truths. Abusers of power, destroyers of lives, manipulators cloaked in fame. He never published it, never spoke of it openly, but within his circle, the whispers grew. Was it paranoia? Mafia gossip? Or did Sinatra really carry a catalog of sins that Hollywood never dared expose? Tonight we peel back the curtain on 8 of those names, the celebrities Sinatra himself allegedly marked as truly evil. And once you hear their stories, you'll never look at Hollywood's golden age the same way again.
Frank Sinatra's journey into legend began in a place that could not have been further from the dazzling lights of Hollywood. He was born in 1915 in Hoboken, New Jersey, the only child of Italian immigrants. His father, Marty, was a local firefighter and part-time boxer known for his quiet strength, while his mother, Dolly, was a fiercely ambitious woman with a sharp tongue and an even sharper instinct for power. Dolly was deeply involved in local politics and, according to many accounts, unafraid to lean on rougher tactics to get her way. From her, Sinatra inherited a lifelong understanding. Influence was more powerful than respectability. Hoboken in the 1920s was a working-class neighborhood, tough and unforgiving. Sinatra's earliest years were marked by hardship. Born with severe birth injuries that left scars on his face and ear, he grew up feeling like an outsider, constantly aware of his imperfections. His childhood illnesses and slight build made him an easy target, and though he longed to belong, he learned early that charm and wit were his greatest weapons. Yet there was something else Hoboken gave him, an education in human nature. Sinatra's mother was feared and admired, operating as both midwife and political enforcer. People in the community owed her favors. Some respected her, others despised her. Young Frank watched these exchanges closely, absorbing the lesson that appearances could be deceiving and that behind every smile might lurk fear, obligation, or resentment. As a teenager, Sinatra found solace in music. He idolized Bing Crosby, memorizing his songs, and soon began to perform in local taverns and amateur shows. But his pursuit of music was more than ambition. It was escape. Standing in smoky bars, he crooned to people who barely noticed him. And while he sang, he observed. The drunk who laughed too loud, the man whispering lies to a woman, the powerful figures who expected respect just for showing up. Sinatra saw them all, and he remembered. Family life only deepened his sense of duality. His father valued hard work, while his mother thrived on political maneuvering. Between the two, Sinatra grew up straddling 2 worlds, the honest grind of the working class and the manipulative games of those chasing influence. This dual vision would shape him forever, giving him both empathy for the underdog and suspicion of the powerful. By the time he reached adulthood, Sinatra carried two things with him: a dream of stardom and a wary eye for the duplicity of human nature. These early years forged a man who would rise to the highest peaks of fame, but who never forgot what he had seen in Hoboken streets, that people, no matter how dazzling they appeared, often hid something dark inside.
Frank Sinatra's first steps into the world of music were anything but glamorous. In the late 1930s, long before he became Old Blue Eyes, he was just another kid from Hoboken hustling for a chance to sing. He worked odd jobs, delivering newspapers, waiting tables, while sneaking into bars and clubs to perform for anyone who would listen. What set him apart was not just his voice, but the intensity with which he delivered every note. Even in those early days, he sang as if the song were his lifeline. His break came in 1939 when he joined the band of Harry James, a trumpet virtuoso who saw something special in the shy young man. Under James's wing, Sinatra began recording singles, including All or Nothing at All. Though it failed to chart at first, the song would later become prophetic. It was an anthem for Sinatra's own philosophy. Either he would conquer the world or be forgotten. He refused to accept anything in between. The real turning point came a year later, when Tommy Dorsey, one of the most powerful band leaders of the era, invited Sinatra to join his orchestra. With Dorsey's band, Sinatra honed his craft, learning the art of phrasing, timing, and breath control. He studied Dorsey's trombone technique obsessively, mastering the long, smooth lines that would become his trademark. Crowds soon noticed. By 1941, women screamed and fainted at his shows, an early wave of hysteria the press dubbed Sinatra mania. But behind the music, Sinatra was already learning lessons about power and influence. The world of big band orchestras was tightly controlled by managers, promoters, and shadowy figures with mob ties. Nightclubs were often run by organized crime families who dictated who could perform and when. Sinatra, still an outsider, learned quickly. Success wasn't only about talent. It was about navigating a dangerous system where a handshake could launch your career or end it. His ambition was relentless. In 1942, after clashes with Dorsey over control and money, Sinatra made the bold move to break free and pursue a solo career. It was risky, but his instincts were right. Within a year, he was headlining the Paramount Theater in New York, drawing unprecedented crowds. Photographs from the time show mobs of young women pressed against barriers, desperate just to glimpse him. Yet even as his fame soared, Sinatra's sharp eyes never stopped observing the people around him. The studio bosses, who demanded obedience. The performers, who courted the press with smiles but seethed in envy behind the scenes. The entertainers, who hid vices behind carefully polished images. Sinatra saw them all. He was building not just a career, but a mental catalog of Hollywood's double lives. By the early 1940s, Sinatra was more than a rising star. He was a man who had clawed his way into the spotlight and already understood the price of survival in an industry ruled as much by secrets as by talent. And those secrets he would carry with him for decades to come. By the early 1950s, Frank Sinatra had already endured a spectacular rise and a near-fatal fall. His early fame had cooled, his voice temporarily damaged, his marriage to Nancy Barbato in tatters. Many believed his career was over, yet Sinatra was nothing if not resilient. With the same determination that had carried him from Hoboken saloons to the Paramount stage, he reinvented himself. What came next would not only secure his place in history, but also cement his reputation as a man who saw and remembered Hollywood's darkest truths. The turning point came in 1953 with From Here to Eternity. Sinatra fought fiercely for the role of Angelo Maggio, even accepting a fraction of his former salary to prove he still had what it took. His performance stunned critics and audiences alike, earning him an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor. In one stroke, Sinatra silenced his doubters and redefined himself, not just a crooner for teenage girls, but a serious artist with gravitas. At the same time, his music career underwent a transformation. Signing with Capitol Records, he released a string of albums that would become timeless classics. In the Wee Small Hours, 1955. Songs for Swingin' Lovers, 1956. Come Fly With Me, 1958. These weren't just records, they were soundtracks to post-war America's hopes and heartbreaks. Sinatra's ability to interpret a lyric, to infuse every phrase with intimacy and ache, was unparalleled. He wasn't just singing, he was confessing, seducing, consoling. The world listened, and they believed him. With fame came power. In Las Vegas, Sinatra emerged as the undisputed king of the Strip. His residency at the Sands Hotel drew audiences of celebrities, politicians, and mob bosses alike. On stage, he was the consummate showman. Offstage, he was a force who blurred the lines between entertainment, politics, and organized crime. He cultivated friendships with powerful men like Sam Giancana and other figures in the Chicago outfit. These connections provided him protection, influence, and a steady stream of rumors about the secrets of Hollywood's elite. It was during this era that the Rat Pack was born. Alongside Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford, and Joey Bishop, Sinatra created a cultural phenomenon. Their late-night shows at the Sands were legendary, a chaotic mix of music, comedy, and debauchery that defined cool for an entire generation. But the Rat Pack was more than entertainment. It was a power block. With Lawford's ties to the Kennedy family, Sinatra found himself in the orbit of the White House. His Palm Springs estate hosted John F. Kennedy, and Sinatra believed himself a kingmaker. For a time, he was. But proximity to power came with peril. When Kennedy distanced himself from Sinatra in the early 1960s, under pressure to cut ties with mob associates, Sinatra was humiliated. He famously built a helicopter landing pad at his home for JFK, only to watch the president stay with Bing Crosby instead. The slight stung, but Sinatra's lesson was clear. Loyalty was fragile, betrayal was everywhere. This was also the era when Sinatra's legendary memory for slights and secrets grew sharper. He watched the way stars treated their colleagues, the way directors exploited actresses, the way comedians mocked the powerless while demanding respect themselves. Some of these observations became the whispers of his hidden list, the mental catalog of celebrities he allegedly regarded as truly evil. Still, professionally, Sinatra was untouchable. He became the chairman of the board, commanding respect not just as a performer, but as a businessman. He founded Reprise Records, giving artists unprecedented control over their music. His concerts filled stadiums, his films drew millions, and his influence seemed limitless. By the 1960s, Sinatra was no longer simply an entertainer, he was a cultural institution. Yet beneath the tuxedos and martinis, there was always the shadow of menace. Friends adored him, but enemies feared him. Stories circulated of Sinatra's volcanic temper, of grudges held for decades, of favors called in through channels most entertainers would never dare to approach. To be on his good side was to have the world open to you. To cross him was to risk professional exile, or worse. And so, as Sinatra stood at the pinnacle of his career, he was more than a singer, more than an actor, more than a star. He was a man who had witnessed the hidden machinery of Hollywood, who had dined with presidents and gangsters alike, who had laughed with comedians he despised, and performed alongside rivals he mistrusted. He was a man who carried, in his memory, a ledger of sins. And according to whispers in his circle, that ledger included 8 names, 8 celebrities who, beneath the sheen of glamour, were something far darker. Sinatra had reached the summit, but with the summit came knowledge, and knowledge in Hollywood was as dangerous as it was powerful.
For all the glamour of his public persona, Frank Sinatra was no stranger to shadows. He had lived among mob bosses, traded favors with politicians, and navigated the ruthless machine of Hollywood. By the height of his career, he had seen enough to know that stardom was often a mask. Behind the polished images on magazine covers, there were egos, betrayals, addictions, and cruelties that few outsiders could imagine. Sinatra remembered them all. In whispered circles, people said he carried what they called a hidden list, a private mental dossier of 8 celebrities he considered not merely flawed, but truly evil. The first was a legendary actress, celebrated worldwide as a symbol of glamour. To audiences, she was the embodiment of elegance and grace, a woman whose face sold tickets and whose name commanded respect. But Sinatra had glimpsed another side. Behind closed doors, she was notorious for violent fits of rage, particularly directed at her own children. Reports of beatings, psychological abuse, and cold manipulations trickled into industry gossip. To Sinatra, who valued loyalty and family, this duplicity was unforgivable. The second was a leading man, adored for his charm. He was the quintessential Hollywood hero, handsome, charismatic, effortlessly likable. Yet Sinatra knew that behind the smile lay a bully. On film sets, he belittled co-stars, sabotaged younger actors who threatened his position, and humiliated women who rejected his advances. Rumors swirled of careers derailed simply because they crossed him. To the public, he was a matinee idol. To Sinatra, he was a predator cloaked in charm. Third on the list was a renowned director, hailed as a genius. His films won awards, critics fawned, and actors clamored to work with him, but Sinatra saw the fear in the eyes of those he controlled. The director used his power to exploit actresses, demanding compliance in exchange for roles, using intimidation as an everyday tool. For Sinatra, who despised betrayal and exploitation, this so-called genius was nothing more than a tyrant. The fourth name was painfully close to Sinatra's own world, a fellow musician who had once shared the stage with him. He too was beloved for his voice, adored by audiences across America. But unlike Sinatra, whose mob associations were often born of necessity and loyalty, this man cultivated ties to organized crime for profit alone. He trafficked in greed, selling out colleagues to gain favor and using underworld protection to climb. To Sinatra, that selfishness was the ultimate corruption. The fifth name was a comedian. He made millions laugh, his films and routines radiating warmth and joy. Offstage, however, he was infamous for cruelty. He belittled waiters, ridiculed fans, and treated subordinates with contempt. His kindness was an act, a mask he wore for the cameras. Sinatra, who could explode in anger but valued respect for the ordinary man, loathed him. He once told a confidant that this comedian was the coldest man alive. The sixth was a jazz icon, a man whose music broke boundaries. But brilliance came hand in hand with chaos. Addicted to drugs and consumed by violent moods, he left devastation in his wake. Fellow musicians feared him. Women wept at the abuse they endured. To Sinatra, who admired artistry but despised recklessness, this man's genius was stained with cruelty. The seventh was not an actor or musician, but a power broker, a Hollywood executive who straddled the line between entertainment and politics. Outwardly, he was a champion of the arts, smiling for cameras and giving speeches about cinema's golden future. But privately, he manipulated careers, blacklisted dissenters, and destroyed lives for profit or political leverage. Sinatra, who understood the game of influence better than most, nevertheless saw in him the embodiment of systemic evil. And finally, the eighth was perhaps the most painful, a member of the Rat Pack itself, a man who laughed on stage beside Sinatra, who basked in the shared glow of their camaraderie, but in private, he betrayed him, leaking information to enemies, mocking Sinatra behind his back, and using their friendship for personal gain. For a man like Frank, whose life revolved around loyalty, this was the ultimate sin. The list was never written down, never published, never proven. It lived in whispers, in side conversations after shows, in confidences exchanged over whiskey and smoke-filled rooms. But whether it was myth or memory, the message was clear. In Sinatra's eyes, Hollywood's brightest stars often carried the darkest secrets. And the chilling truth was this: if a man like Frank Sinatra, who walked in the company of gangsters and presidents alike, considered someone truly evil, how much darker must their reality have been?
Hollywood is a place where triumph and downfall often arrive hand in hand. For the figures whispered to be on Sinatra's hidden list, the illusion of perfection could not last forever. In time, cracks appeared, and the consequences of their hidden lives surfaced for the world to see. The glamorous actress, once adored for her beauty and grace, ended her days in bitterness. Estranged from her children, her name tarnished by accusations of abuse, she became a symbol of how cruelty corrodes even the brightest star. The leading man, who once commanded audiences with a smile, lived long enough to see his reputation destroyed. Stories of his bullying and cruelty surfaced in memoirs and tell-all books, turning what had been admiration into lasting disdain. The celebrated director, whose genius had won him statues and acclaim, became infamous for the fear he instilled. In later years, actresses came forward with stories of manipulation and abuse, tainting his legacy. His films endured, but his name was spoken with unease, his triumph overshadowed by his cruelty. The fellow musician who had pursued mob ties out of greed found himself abandoned when those same underworld friends turned against him. His career collapsed, and the public who once adored his songs forgot him almost entirely. The comedian's mask of laughter cracked as well. By the end, he was isolated, his reputation soured by accounts of his arrogance and disdain for the very fans who had elevated him. He died alone, his fortune intact, but his legacy hollow. The jazz icon, despite his brilliance, succumbed to his addictions, his life ending in chaos. His music lived on, but the stories of violence and despair haunted his memory. Even the Hollywood power broker, once untouchable, eventually faced disgrace. Political winds shifted, scandals broke, and his manipulation of careers and reputations became impossible to hide. His empire crumbled, leaving behind only whispers of how many lives he had ruined. And then there was the Rat Pack member, the betrayal Sinatra never forgave. His career faltered as audiences moved on, and though he remained a familiar name, he was forever marked by the loss of Sinatra's trust. As for Sinatra himself, the shadows he carried came back to haunt him. The FBI kept thick files on his mob connections. Politicians distanced themselves from him. His marriages collapsed under the weight of his temper and infidelity. Even at the height of his fame, Sinatra battled inner demons: volatility, rage, loneliness. He survived longer than many of those on his hidden list, but not unscarred. He knew, perhaps better than anyone, that in Hollywood, no one escapes tragedy. Not even Frank Sinatra.
Frank Sinatra's name today still echoes with timeless songs and unforgettable performances. His voice remains the soundtrack of romance, rebellion, and American ambition. But alongside the music lies a legacy that is far more complicated. that of a man who saw through Hollywood's illusions and never forgot the darkness he found there. The so-called hidden list may never be proven, may never exist on paper, but its legend persists because it rings true. Sinatra's world was filled with performers who wore masks for the public and unleashed cruelty in private. By remembering their sins and by allegedly categorizing them as truly evil, Sinatra exposed a chilling reality. The bright lights of Hollywood were often fueled by shadows. What sets Sinatra apart is not that he was flawless. He was not. His temper, his mob ties, his turbulent relationships made him controversial even in his lifetime. But he was also uniquely positioned to observe, to recognize the hypocrisy of those who seemed untouchable. His list became less about gossip and more about a reflection of the system itself, an industry where success could coexist with cruelty, and where the most admired stars could hide the darkest secrets. Today, Sinatra's music endures, his films are remembered, and his influence remains vast. Yet the legend of the Hidden West lingers, a reminder that fame is not a shield against moral decay. Perhaps that is his most enduring legacy. Not just the songs, but the lesson that behind the glamour, Hollywood is a place where loyalty is rare, betrayal is common, and evil can flourish behind the brightest of smiles.
You've now walked through the shadows Frank Sinatra carried with him. Secrets, betrayals, and the whispered legend of a hidden list that marked Hollywood's brightest stars as truly evil. Whether fact or myth, the stories reveal a deeper truth, that behind the glamour, fame often hides cruelty, and the spotlight can cast the darkest shadows. But Sinatra's list was only one chapter in a much larger story. Hollywood has always been a place of legends and lies, triumphs and tragedies. If Sinatra knew these secrets, what other lists might still be buried in the vaults of time? Which stars of today will one day be revealed for who they really are? If you want to keep peeling back the curtain on Hollywood's darkest mysteries, don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe to Beyond the Red Carpet. The next secret may be darker still.